Picture this. It's the year 260 BC. The Mediterranean Sea, that vast, glittering expanse that connects civilizations, belongs to one undisputed master, Carthage. For centuries, their warships have ruled these waters like floating fortresses. Their sailors, born on the waves, their admirals, legendary. Now imagine a nation of farmers and foot soldiers, Rome. A people who've never built a proper warship in their entire history. A civilization that views the sea with suspicion, even fear. And yet, in just a few short months, these land-loving Romans are about to challenge the greatest naval power the world has ever known. Sounds impossible, right? But what happened next at a place called Mylae would change the course of human history forever. Here's what you need to understand. The year is 264 BC, and the Mediterranean world is holding its breath. Two superpowers, Rome and Carthage, have been circling each other like wary predators for decades. And now, they're about to collide in what will become one of the longest, bloodiest conflicts the ancient world has ever seen. The First Punic War. But this isn't just any war. This is a clash of civilizations so fundamental, so total, that it will reshape the entire Mediterranean world for centuries to come. Let's set the stage properly, because what's about to unfold is even more incredible than you might imagine. Rome in 264 BC was, well, it was impressive, absolutely. But it was a land power. The land power, actually. The Roman legions, those disciplined, relentless formations of heavily armored infantry, were nearly unstoppable on solid ground. From the dusty plains of Latium to the hill country of Samnium, Roman soldiers had proven themselves again and again. Their tactics brutally effective, their discipline legendary, their courage unquestionable. But here's the thing. Rome's relationship with the sea was, to put it mildly, complicated. Romans were farmers at heart. They grew wheat and grapes. They raised cattle and pigs. They built roads, magnificent arrow-straight roads that would last for millennia. They built aqueducts that defied engineering logic. They built walls and fortresses and temples. But ships, naval warfare, absolutely foreign to them. The Roman worldview was fundamentally terrestrial. The sea was, well, it was that wet, unpredictable thing at the edge of their territory. Useful for trade, sure. But fighting on it? That was someone else's business. Now Carthage was a completely different story. This maritime empire, perched on the North African coast in what's now Tunisia, was born from the sea. Founded by Phoenician colonists from Tyre around 814 BC, Carthage had spent centuries perfecting the art of naval dominance. Their ships were technological marvels. Their sailors could navigate by the stars with uncanny precision. Their admirals understood wind and current like a farmer understands seasons. And their wealth? Staggering. Absolutely staggering. Carthaginian trading networks stretched from the Pillars of Hercules, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar, all the way to the Levantine coast. They controlled Sicily's western ports. They dominated Sardinia and Corsica. They even had outposts on the Atlantic coast of Africa and Spain. The Carthaginian quinquereme, their standard warship, was a masterpiece of ancient engineering. Picture this, a vessel nearly 150 feet long, powered by 300 rowers arranged in groups of 5 per oar. Bronze-plated ram jutting from the prow like a predator's tooth. Deck space for 120 Marines armed to the teeth. These ships could turn on a coin, accelerate like hunting cats, and smash enemy vessels to splinters with devastating ram attacks. And the Carthaginians had hundreds of them. So when tensions between Rome and Carthage finally erupted over control of Messana, a strategic city in northeastern Sicily, everyone assumed they knew how this would play out. Rome would dominate on land, Carthage would control the seas, and the war would grind on indefinitely, neither side able to deliver a knockout blow. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because what's about to unfold is even more incredible. The spark that ignited this war was almost absurdly small. A group of Italian mercenaries called the Mamertines, Sons of Mars in Latin, had seized control of Messana through treachery and violence. When the Greek city of Syracuse threatened to crush them, the Mamertines did what desperate men do. They called for help, and both Rome and Carthage answered. Why did Rome care about some mercenary-held city across the strait in Sicily? Simple geography. Sicily sits like a stepping stone between the Italian peninsula and North Africa. Control Sicily, and you control the central Mediterranean. Lose Sicily and you're vulnerable. The Roman Senate debated for weeks. Some senators argued passionately against involvement. These Mamertines are pirates and murderers, they said. Helping them violates everything Rome stands for. Others countered with cold strategic logic. If Carthage takes Messana, they argued, they control the strait. And if they control the strait, they can threaten southern Italy whenever they choose. The Roman people, the citizens who voted in the tribal assembly, made the final call. And their decision? Yes, help the Mamertines, challenge Carthage. The die was cast. Initial Roman operations in Sicily went surprisingly well, actually. The legions crossed the strait, relieved Messana, and then did what Romans did best. They marched, fought, and conquered. City after city in eastern Sicily fell to Roman siege tactics and military discipline. But here's where it gets crazy. The Romans quickly realized a brutal truth. As long as Carthage controlled the sea lanes, they could supply their forces in western Sicily indefinitely. They could bring in fresh troops from North Africa. They could import grain, weapons, and gold. They could strangle Roman supply lines while keeping their own wide open. Land victories, no matter how impressive, wouldn't win this war. The Romans needed a navy, but remember, this was a civilization that had never built a serious warship. They had some coastal patrol boats, sure, small transport vessels, absolutely. But a battle fleet capable of challenging Carthage? It seemed impossible. And yet, what the Romans did next defies belief. Because when Rome decides to do something, no matter how impossible it seems, they don't just try, they revolutionize. But the path to Mylae? It was paved with innovation, desperation, and a healthy dose of Roman stubbornness that would become legendary. The stage was set, but no one could have predicted what was coming. Trouble was brewing. The year is 261 BC, and Rome faces a problem that can't be solved by marching or fortifying or any of the traditional tools in their military toolkit. They need ships. Not just any ships, warships that can match Carthage's legendary quinqueremes. Here's what's absolutely incredible. The Romans had exactly zero institutional knowledge of naval warfare. No admirals who'd commanded fleets, no shipwrights who'd built war galleys, no rowers who'd trained for naval combat, nothing. You can imagine how the Roman Senate must have felt. Sitting in their togas, these hard-bitten veterans of countless land campaigns contemplating a military domain they knew absolutely nothing about. The easy choice? Give up on naval ambitions, accept Carthaginian sea dominance as fact, fight the war on land and hope for the best. But Rome didn't get where it was by taking the easy path. The story of how Rome built its first fleet is, well, it's the stuff of legend. And incredibly, most of it appears to be true. According to ancient sources, particularly the Greek historian Polybius, who had access to Roman records, a Carthaginian quinquereme ran aground on the Italian coast. The Roman authorities seized it immediately. And then, they did something absolutely brilliant. They took it apart. Piece by piece, plank by plank, the Romans reverse-engineered the Carthaginian warship. They studied the hull design, noting how the strakes were joined. They examined the rowing arrangements, understanding how 300 men could power such a massive vessel. They measured the ram, learning how bronze plates were fitted to create that devastating underwater weapon. And then they built, not one ship, not 10 ships, They commissioned 100 quinqueremes and 20 triremes, 120 warships total to be constructed simultaneously. The audacity of this decision cannot be overstated. This was like a medieval kingdom deciding to build a space program. The Romans were attempting to create from scratch in months a naval capability that had taken Carthage centuries to develop. Every coastal city in Roman territory became a shipyard. Forests were cleared for timber. Foundries worked day and night casting bronze fittings. Rope makers twisted miles of rigging. Sailmakers stitched vast expanses of canvas. But here's the thing, so building the ships was only half the problem. Who would row them? Who would sail them? Who would command them? Roman solution? Brilliant in its simplicity, brutal in its efficiency. While the ships were under construction, the Romans built full-scale rowing frames on land, basically wooden models of a quinquereme's rowing deck. They recruited citizens and allies, seated them at these land-based oars, and trained them in the rowing rhythms and coordination needed for naval warfare. Can you imagine it? Thousands of men sitting on dry land pulling phantom oars, learning to synchronize their strokes with shouted commands and drum beats. It must have looked absolutely ridiculous. But it worked. Ancient sources tell us that by the time the ships were completed, this is hard to believe, but it's completely true. The Roman rowers were already trained and coordinated. Still, there remained one massive, seemingly insurmountable problem. Roman Marines, no matter how well trained on land, couldn't match Carthaginian naval expertise. The Carthaginians had been fighting on water for centuries. They could execute complex ramming maneuvers. They could outturn and out-accelerate any opponent. They knew how to use wind and current to devastating effect. In a traditional naval battle, ramming attacks, boarding actions, maritime expertise, Rome would be destroyed. So the Romans changed the rules entirely. Enter the corvus. The corvus, Latin for raven, was a Roman innovation so revolutionary, so completely unprecedented, that it transformed naval warfare in one stroke. Here's what it was. Imagine a hinged bridge about 30 feet long and 4 feet wide, mounted on a rotating pole near the front of a Roman ship. At the business end, a heavy bronze spike shaped like a raven's beak. Here's how it worked, and this is genuinely brilliant. When a Roman ship closed with a Carthaginian vessel, the corvus would swing out over the enemy deck. Then it would drop, smash, that bronze spike punching through the enemy ship's planking and locking the two vessels together. Instantly, the naval battle became a land battle. Roman legionaries, those superbly trained heavy infantry who'd conquered half of Italy, could now simply march across the corvus bridge onto the enemy deck. Shields locked, swords drawn, moving in formation. What chance did Carthaginian sailors have against Roman infantry in close combat? None, absolutely none. The corvus turned every Roman warship into a mobile assault platform. It negated centuries of Carthaginian naval expertise. It transformed Rome's greatest weakness, lack of seamanship, into irrelevance. But here's the crucial question. Would it actually work in combat? The Carthaginians certainly didn't think so. To them, this corvus contraption must have seemed like desperate innovation from naval amateurs. Clever, perhaps, but surely no match for proven Carthaginian tactics and battle-hardened crews. The Carthaginian admiral assigned to Sicily was named Hannibal. Not the famous one, but Hannibal Gisco, a capable and experienced naval commander. When he learned that Rome had somehow constructed an entire battle fleet, he must have been intrigued, certainly. Perhaps even concerned. But he wasn't afraid. Why should he be? His crews had grown up on these waters. His officers had commanded fleets in a dozen campaigns. His ships were the finest in the Mediterranean. What could these Roman farmers possibly do against him? And that's when everything started to fall apart. For Carthage, at least. Because what nobody, not Hannibal Gisco, not the Carthaginian Senate, not even the Romans themselves, fully understood was this. The corvus wasn't just a weapon. It was a paradigm shift, a fundamental rethinking of what naval warfare could be. And the man about to command the Roman fleet? He was walking into the greatest gamble of his career, with absolutely no idea if any of this would actually work. Each decision brought them closer to the inevitable. The moment of truth had arrived. It's 260 BC, and the Roman fleet, 120 ships strong, crews barely trained, commanders with zero naval combat experience, is about to face its baptism by fire. The Roman consul in command was Gaius Duilius. Now here's what's fascinating about Duilius. He was originally assigned to lead Roman land forces in Sicily. But when the previous consul, the one who was supposed to command the fleet, managed to lose 17 ships in a minor engagement before the main fleet was even complete, the Senate made a bold decision. They gave Duilius both commands, land and sea. You could hear the whispers in Rome. A consul with no naval experience commanding a fleet of untested ships against the greatest maritime power in the world? It seemed like suicide, but Duilius had something the Carthaginians didn't. He had the corvus, and he had Roman infantry who'd been drilled in boarding tactics until they could execute them in their sleep. Still, he needed to find the Carthaginian fleet first. Intelligence reached Duilius that Hannibal Gisco was operating near Mylae, a coastal town on the northern coast of Sicily, about 20 miles west of Messana. The Carthaginian admiral was conducting what he probably thought was routine operations. Raiding coastal settlements, disrupting Roman supply lines, asserting Carthaginian naval dominance. Hannibal had about 130 ships under his command, a slightly larger fleet than Rome's and vastly more experienced. Duilius made his move. The Roman fleet set sail from Messana, hugging the Sicilian coastline, corvus bridges mounted and ready. Can you imagine what those Roman sailors were feeling? Many of them had never been in a real naval battle. They'd trained on land. They'd practiced on calm waters. But this was different. The deck pitches beneath your feet. Salt spray stings your eyes. The wind howls through the rigging, and somewhere ahead, over the horizon, the most fearsome naval force in the known world is waiting. The two fleets made contact near Mylae on a bright Mediterranean morning. The sources don't give us an exact date, but it was likely sometime in late summer or early fall of 260 BC. Hannibal Gisco, we're told, initially felt confident. Why wouldn't he? His scouts had reported the Roman fleet's approach, and everything he saw confirmed his assumptions. The Roman ships moved awkwardly. Their crews were clearly inexperienced. They held formation, but barely. This would be, he thought, a straightforward victory. Ram a few Roman ships, capture a few more, send the rest fleeing back to Italy with their tails between their legs. A lesson taught, Carthaginian supremacy confirmed, but Hannibal Gisco was about to learn a lesson himself. Never underestimate Roman innovation. The Carthaginian admiral arranged his fleet in a traditional combat formation. His fastest ships, those sleek quinqueremes with the most experienced crews, formed the vanguard. These would execute the initial ramming attacks, punching holes in the Roman line and creating chaos. Supporting vessels would exploit the breaches. Boarding parties would mop up any disabled Roman ships. Standard naval tactics, refined over centuries, executed by professionals. The Carthaginians surged forward. This is it, the moment we've been building to. The leading Carthaginian ships are bearing down on the Roman line with terrifying speed. Bronze rams cut through the water like shark fins. Rowers are synchronized perfectly, their oars rising and falling in hypnotic rhythm. Carthaginian marines line the rails, weapons ready, prepared to leap onto Roman decks. On the Roman ships, you can practically feel the tension. Legionaries grip their shields tighter. Centurions bark last-minute orders. The corvus operators stand ready, hands on the release mechanisms. The first Carthaginian quinquereme closes to ramming distance. 50 yards, 30 yards, 20, and then the corvus drops. Crash! That bronze spike punches through the Carthaginian deck with devastating force, locking the ships together. The Carthaginian crew barely has time to process what's happening before Roman legionaries are charging across the bridge. Shields locked, swords drawn, moving with the disciplined precision that had conquered Italy. The Carthaginian marines fight back desperately. They're skilled fighters, absolutely. But they're sailors first, fighters second. These Romans, they're professional soldiers. Warriors who train for this exact scenario every single day. The fight is brutal but brief. Within minutes, the Carthaginian ship is taken. Roman marines swarm across the deck, overwhelming resistance, securing the vessel as a prize. But here's where it gets truly incredible. This isn't happening to just one Carthaginian ship, it's happening to dozens. All along the battle line, Roman corvus bridges are dropping. Smash, 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 like a horrific drumbeat of Carthaginian disaster. Each locked ship becomes a Roman victory. Each boarding action plays out the same way. Disciplined Roman infantry overwhelming shocked Carthaginian crews who've never faced anything like this. Hannibal Gisco, watching from his flagship, must have felt the cold grip of realization settling over him. This wasn't going according to plan, not even close. His fastest ships, his best crews, were being captured one by one. The Roman corvus had turned his greatest advantage, speed and maneuverability, into a liability. Getting close to a Roman ship, which was the whole point of ramming tactics, now meant certain capture. He needed to adapt, fast. Hannibal signaled his remaining ships to change tactics. Stay back, use distance. Try to maneuver around the Romans, hit them from angles where the corvus couldn't reach. But the Roman ships, though less maneuverable, had their own advantages. They were built sturdy, massively overbuilt actually. The corvus itself added significant weight up high, making the ships more stable in rough water. And the Roman crews, though inexperienced at sailing, were learning fast. More importantly, the Romans didn't need to outmaneuver the Carthaginians. They just needed to get close enough for the corvus to work. Once those bridges dropped, Roman tactical superiority took over. The battle became a chaotic melee of wood and bronze and screaming men. Carthaginian ships desperately trying to maintain distance. Roman vessels pushing forward relentlessly, seeking that crucial moment when they could deploy their devastating boarding bridges. And slowly, inexorably, the balance tipped toward Rome. But here's the shocking truth. Hannibal Gisco hadn't survived this long as a Carthaginian admiral by being stupid. He had one more card to play. One desperate gambit that might turn this disaster into victory. What was this master strategy? Well, let's just say it involved the one thing Romans couldn't fight with swords alone. But the real test on them was yet to come. Things were about to get much, much worse. For Carthage, at least. Hannibal Gisco, seeing his fleet being systematically dismantled, made a decision that probably saved his life but sealed Carthage's defeat. He ordered a retreat, but not just any retreat. A tactical withdrawal designed to salvage what could be saved. His fastest ships, those that hadn't yet engaged, would cover the escape. Damaged vessels would be abandoned if necessary. The priority was preserving experienced crews and preventing total annihilation. It was the right call, absolutely the right call. But it was also an admission of something unprecedented. Carthage had just lost a major naval battle to a nation that hadn't possessed a real war fleet 6 months ago. Let that sink in. The Carthaginians broke off contact and fled westward, toward their bases in western Sicily and North Africa. The Romans, their ships less swift but victorious, pursued for a time before Duilius called them back. Why not chase the Carthaginians down? Simple pragmatism. Roman crews were exhausted. The ships had taken damage, and Duilius was smart enough to know that pushing his luck against a cornered enemy was a recipe for disaster. Better to secure the victory he had than risk it all chasing glory. You know what? If you're as fascinated by this incredible story as I am, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps us bring more of these untold stories of empires, battles, and human drama to life. The clash of civilizations, the birth of tactics that would change warfare forever. The moment when Rome truly became an unstoppable force. Trust me, the best part is still coming. Now where were we? Oh right, the moment that would change everything. The casualties told the story better than any account. The Carthaginians lost approximately 45 to 50 ships, either captured or destroyed. Roman losses? Minimal. A few damaged vessels. Some casualties from the close quarters fighting. But nothing remotely comparable to the Carthaginian disaster. Among the captured ships was one particularly significant prize. A Carthaginian 7, a massive heptares that served as flagship material. Capturing it wasn't just a military victory. It was a propaganda coup of the First Order. But the real significance of Mylae wasn't counted in ships. It was the shattering of an assumption, the destruction of a certainty that had governed Mediterranean politics for generations. Carthaginian naval supremacy wasn't inevitable after all. Here's where it gets crazy. The news of Mylae spread across the ancient world like wildfire. In Greek cities, in Phoenician ports, in Celtic villages along the coast of Gaul, people heard the same incredible story. Rome had beaten Carthage on the water. Impossible, except it had happened. In Carthage itself, the reaction was complex. Shock, certainly, anger, absolutely, but also something else. A growing realization that they were facing an enemy unlike any they'd encountered before. Other opponents had challenged Carthage before. Greek colonists in Sicily had fought them for centuries. Syracuse had fielded powerful fleets, but those were naval powers fighting a naval power on equal terms. Rome was different. Rome had no business winning naval battles. They were farmers and infantry. And yet they'd analyzed the problem, innovated a solution, and executed it with devastating effectiveness. What else might Rome be capable of? The Carthaginian Senate, meeting in their impressive council house overlooking the harbor, faced an uncomfortable truth. This war, which they'd expected to dominate through sea power, was now genuinely contested. They would need to invest more resources, recruit more crews, build more ships. The Romans, meanwhile, celebrated like they'd just conquered the world. Gaius Duilius returned to Rome in triumph, literally. He was awarded a triumph, that highest honor of Roman military achievement, where a victorious general paraded through the streets of Rome while the entire city cheered. But Duilius's triumph had a special feature, a naval theme. The Romans erected a column in the Forum, the Columna Rostrata, or Column of Beaks. This victory monument was decorated with the rostra, the bronze rams, taken from captured Carthaginian ships. These massive bronze beaks, each one torn from the prow of a defeated enemy vessel, were mounted on the column like trophies. You can still see parts of this column today, over 2,200 years later, preserved in the Capitoline museums in Rome. Those bronze rams, corroded by centuries, still speak to the magnitude of what happened at Mylae. The inscription on the column was pure Roman propaganda, but also absolutely true. It proclaimed Duilius as the first Roman commander to triumph for a naval victory, the first to defeat the Carthaginians on the sea, the man who made Rome a naval power. But the Romans didn't just celebrate, they analyzed, they learned, they improved. Naval warfare was now part of Roman military doctrine. The Corvus had proven itself, but Roman engineers were already thinking about improvements. How could they make the ships faster? How could they train crews more effectively? How could they build on this victory? This was Rome at its best, pragmatic, relentless, always evolving. The Carthaginians, for their part, weren't about to concede defeat. Mylae was a setback, a shocking, humiliating setback. But Carthage still controlled most of the Western Mediterranean. They still had vast resources, they still had experienced admirals and skilled crews. The war was far from over. In fact, it had barely begun. The First Punic War would grind on for another 17 years. There would be more naval battles. Some Roman victories, some Carthaginian. There would be costly sieges, brutal land campaigns, and staggering losses on both sides. But Mylae marked a turning point that could never be undone. Rome had proven it could innovate and adapt. More than that, it had proven it could master domains that seemed completely foreign to its nature. A land power had become a sea power through sheer force of will, engineering brilliance, and tactical innovation. What lesson was the world learning? Never count Rome out. No matter how impossible the challenge seems, the Romans will find a way. Little did anyone know. This ability to adapt and overcome would become Rome's defining characteristic for the next 6 centuries. But the immediate consequences of Mylae? They were about to reshape the entire strategic landscape of the Mediterranean. What happened next will blow your mind. This is it, the moment we've been building to. Because Mylae wasn't just about one battle. It was about what that battle unlocked, the strategic possibilities it created, the shift in power dynamics that rippled across the ancient world. Let's talk about what victory at Mylae actually meant in practical terms. Before Mylae, Rome's strategy in Sicily was fundamentally defensive. Sure, they'd won land battles. Yes, they'd captured cities. But Carthage could always reinforce, resupply, and outlast them because the sea lanes were secure. After Mylae, everything changed. Rome now had the capability, not just the ambition, but the actual military capability, to challenge Carthaginian control of the Mediterranean. They could threaten supply lines. They could raid coastal cities. They could project power in ways previously unimaginable. The consul Duilius, fresh from his triumph, didn't rest on his laurels. He immediately began expanding Roman naval operations. More ships were commissioned. Training intensified, coastal bases were fortified, and the Romans started raiding. Carthaginian colonies in Sardinia and Corsica suddenly found themselves vulnerable. Roman fleets appeared off the coast of North Africa itself, the Carthaginian heartland, conducting hit-and-run attacks that were as much about psychological warfare as actual damage. The message was clear. Nowhere is safe anymore. In 259 BC, just 1 year after Mylae, the Romans launched an even more ambitious naval campaign. A fleet of 330 ships, 330, set sail for Sardinia. The Corvus-equipped Roman vessels devastated a Carthaginian fleet sent to intercept them. Sardinia, that crucial island rich in grain and minerals, started to look vulnerable to Roman conquest. The strategic calculus had shifted dramatically. Carthage, which had planned to strangle Rome economically while winning through superior naval mobility, now found itself on the defensive at sea. But here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. The Carthaginians weren't stupid. They learned from Mylae just as the Romans had. Carthaginian naval tactics evolved. Admirals stopped trying to close with Roman ships for traditional ramming attacks. Instead, they focused on hit-and-run tactics, using their superior speed to strike and retreat before the Corvus could be deployed. They also started targeting the Corvus itself. Carthaginian ships would maneuver to strike Roman vessels from angles where the boarding bridge couldn't reach, from directly behind or in rough weather when the Corvus was too dangerous to deploy. This became a technological and tactical arms race. Rome would innovate, Carthage would adapt, Rome would counter-adapt, and so on. But the fundamental advantage belonged to Rome. Because every battle that came down to close quarters fighting favored Roman infantry. The Corvus ensured that most battles did come down to exactly that. By 256 BC, just 4 years after Mylae, Rome felt confident enough to attempt something absolutely audacious. They planned an invasion of North Africa itself. Not a raid, not a punitive expedition, a full-scale invasion aimed at conquering Carthage on its home soil. The fleet assembled for this invasion was staggering. Over 330 warships plus transport vessels carrying 140,000 troops. It was, at the time, possibly the largest naval invasion force ever assembled in the ancient world. The Roman plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Land in Africa, defeat Carthaginian armies, threaten Carthage itself, force them to recall all forces from Sicily to defend their homeland, win the war. And it nearly worked. The invasion force, commanded by the consuls Marcus Atilius Regulus and Lucius Manlius Vulso, encountered a Carthaginian fleet off Cape Ecnomus on the southern coast of Sicily. What followed was one of the largest naval battles in ancient history. The numbers are staggering. Rome fielded about 330 warships. Carthage brought roughly 350, combined crew and marines, probably close to 300,000 men involved in the battle. The clash at Ecnomus showcased how much Roman naval doctrine had evolved since Mylae. Roman ships fought in coordinated formations. They executed complex maneuvers. And when the corvus dropped, and it dropped dozens of times, Roman marines boarded with practiced efficiency. Carthage lost approximately 100 ships. Rome lost fewer than 30. The invasion fleet reached Africa and landed successfully. Regulus, now in sole command after Manlius returned to Rome, proceeded to rampage through the Carthaginian countryside, winning battle after battle against hastily assembled defenders. For a brief shining moment, it looked like Rome would win the First Punic War in a single devastating campaign. But then hubris met reality. The Carthaginians, desperate and facing annihilation, hired a Spartan mercenary general named Xanthippus. This Greek military professional reorganized the Carthaginian army, implemented proper training, and, critically, made effective use of elephants and cavalry on the flat African terrain. In 255 BC, at the Battle of Tunis, Xanthippus crushed Regulus's army. The Romans, accustomed to fighting in the hills of Italy where their infantry tactics excelled, found themselves outmaneuvered on open plains. Carthaginian cavalry swept their flanks. War elephants broke their formations. Regulus himself was captured. His army, that proud force that had seemed unstoppable, was annihilated. The surviving Roman forces retreated to their ships and fled back to Sicily. But even then, disaster wasn't finished with them. A massive storm struck the fleet during the voyage home, sinking 384 ships. Over 100,000 men drowned in one of history's worst maritime catastrophes. In the span of months, Rome's triumphant African invasion had turned into complete catastrophe. And yet, and this is crucial, Rome didn't quit. Any other nation might have sued for peace after such losses. The Carthaginians certainly expected Rome to negotiate. What they got instead was quintessentially Roman stubbornness. Rome built another fleet, recruited another army, continued the war. This is where we see the real legacy of Mylae. That battle hadn't just proven Rome could fight at sea. It had instilled a confidence that even catastrophic defeats couldn't shake. The Romans now believed deep in their collective soul that mastery of the sea was achievable. Difficult, yes, costly, absolutely, but achievable. The First Punic War would continue for another 14 years after the African disaster. There would be more naval battles, more storms, more victories and defeats for both sides. But the strategic reality established at Mylae never changed. Rome was now a naval power. Carthage could no longer count on maritime supremacy. And in a war between two relatively equal powers, that meant the one with greater resources and stubbornness would eventually prevail. That power was Rome. The worst part? For Carthage, at least, this was only the beginning. Because what Rome learned from the First Punic War, that innovation and adaptability could overcome any challenge, would echo through the centuries. But first, they had to finish what Mylae had started. In the silence that followed, the First Punic War finally ended in 241 BC. 23 years of brutal, costly fighting, hundreds of thousands dead, entire fleets sunk, fortunes spent, and Rome won. The final decisive battle wasn't even particularly dramatic. A naval engagement off the Aegates Islands where Rome's now experienced fleet crushed a Carthaginian force trying to resupply their last strongholds in Sicily. But by 241 BC, that outcome was almost inevitable. Rome had learned too much, adapted too well, grown too strong at sea. The peace terms were harsh. Carthage had to evacuate Sicily entirely. Pay Rome a crushing indemnity, 3,200 talents of silver, which in modern terms would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Release all Roman prisoners without ransom. Sicily, that beautiful resource-rich island, became Rome's first overseas province, the first step in what would become a Mediterranean-spanning empire. But here's what nobody fully grasped at the time. The real victory wasn't territorial, it was psychological, cultural, strategic. Rome had proven something far more important than that it could beat Carthage. It had proven it could master anything. Naval warfare, which had seemed completely alien to Roman culture and capability, was now just another weapon in the Roman arsenal. Think about what this meant going forward. Any challenge Rome faced, any obstacle that seemed insurmountable, would now be met with the same approach. Analyze it. Innovate a solution, execute with relentless determination, adapt and overcome. This became the Roman way. The corvus itself? Ironically, it gradually fell out of use. The Romans, having mastered naval construction and seamanship, no longer needed the trick that had won at Mylae. They could now outsail and outfight opponents using conventional tactics. The student had become the master. But the legacy of innovation persisted. In future conflicts, Rome would continue to show this remarkable ability to adopt enemy tactics, improve them, and turn them back against their creators. Fighting Hellenistic pike phalanxes, Rome adapted and developed combined arms tactics that neutralized the phalanx. Facing Parthian horse archers, Rome learned mobility and skirmishing tactics. Every challenge became an opportunity to evolve. What Carthage couldn't have known, what nobody could have known in 260 BC, was that Mylae marked the beginning of Rome's unstoppable rise. Not because Rome won one battle, but because of what that victory represented about Roman character and capabilities. The financial cost to Rome was staggering, absolutely. The First Punic War nearly bankrupted the Republic. Roman citizens paid extra taxes for years. The wealthy were conscripted to build ships at their own expense. The treasury was drained, but Rome paid the price. They always paid the price. Carthage, meanwhile, faced internal turmoil. The mercenary armies that had fought for them in Sicily revolted when Carthage couldn't pay them, leading to the horrific mercenary war that nearly destroyed the Carthaginian state from within. The empire that had seemed so mighty in 264 BC was now weakened, vulnerable, and increasingly aware that it had created a monster. Because Rome wasn't satisfied with Sicily, the lessons of the First Punic War, particularly the lesson of Mylae, had taught Rome that the Mediterranean could be conquered. Not just the land around it, but the sea itself. The entire interconnected world of ancient civilizations. Within a few decades, Rome would fight Carthage again. The Second Punic War, you might know it as Hannibal's War, would be even more dramatic, even more costly. But the outcome, almost predetermined by what happened at Mylae, Rome had learned it could adapt and overcome. That confidence, born in a single naval battle off the coast of Sicily, would carry them through Hannibal's invasion, through the conquest of Greece, through the destruction of Carthage itself in 146 BC. Here's what's genuinely incredible about the aftermath of Mylae. The Roman naval tradition that began with reverse engineering a captured Carthaginian ship would continue for centuries. Roman fleets would dominate the Mediterranean for 600 years. The Mare Nostrum, our sea, they called it. And they meant it literally. Piracy suppressed, rival naval powers crushed, control of sea lanes absolute. All of it traced back to that moment in 260 BC when Gaius Duilius looked at the greatest naval power in the world and said, "We can beat them." The Corvus, that ingenious boarding bridge, became a symbol of Roman innovation. Centuries later, Roman historians would write about it with pride. Proof that Roman ingenuity could overcome any obstacle. It appeared on coins and sculptures in historical accounts. But perhaps the most lasting consequence of Mylae was something more subtle. It established a pattern. Rome would face what seemed like an impossible challenge. Everyone would predict failure. Rome would innovate, adapt, and prevail. Then the cycle would repeat with an even greater challenge. This pattern would continue until there were no more challenges left to overcome. Until Rome stood alone, the unquestioned master of the known world. What Caesar couldn't have known, what Pompey couldn't have predicted, was that the naval power Rome first claimed at Mylae would be crucial in their own civil wars centuries later. History, as it turns out, echoes in the most unexpected ways, but the philosophical implications, they're even more profound. Looking back across the centuries, the Battle of Mylae stands as one of those pivotal moments where the trajectory of human civilization shifts. Not because of its size. There were bigger naval battles in ancient history. Not because of its casualties. There were far bloodier conflicts. Mylae matters because of what it represented about human potential. Think about this for a moment. In early 261 BC, Rome had no navy, zero institutional knowledge of naval warfare, no admirals, no shipwrights experienced in warship construction, no tactical doctrine for sea battles. By late 260 BC, less than 2 years later, they had crushed the greatest naval power in the Mediterranean. How is that even possible? The answer tells us something profound about human adaptability, about the power of innovation, about what can be achieved when a society commits completely to overcoming a challenge. Rome looked at an impossible problem and broke it down into manageable pieces. They needed ships. They reverse-engineered a captured vessel and built 120 copies simultaneously. They needed trained rowers. They built practice frames on land and drilled constantly. They needed to overcome superior enemy seamanship. They invented a completely new weapon that changed the rules of naval combat. Problem, solution, execution. This is the Roman genius distilled to its essence. But here's where it gets philosophically interesting. Rome's success at Mylae came from recognizing their own limitations. They knew they couldn't outsail Carthage. They knew their crews weren't as experienced. They knew traditional naval tactics would destroy them. Lesser civilizations might have despaired. Rome changed the game. The Corvus was an admission of weakness transformed into a weapon. It said, "Yes, you're better sailors than us, but we're better fighters. So we're going to turn every naval battle into an infantry battle where our strengths dominate." This kind of strategic thinking, acknowledging reality while refusing to be bound by it, became Rome's signature move throughout its history. Sound familiar? It should, because this pattern of innovation under pressure, of adapting to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges, isn't unique to ancient Rome. It's a fundamentally human capability that we see again and again throughout history. The Allied forces in World War II, facing German submarine dominance in the Atlantic, developed convoy systems, sonar, depth charges, and eventually cracked the Enigma code. They turned a defensive crisis into technological and tactical superiority. The American space program in the 1960s, facing Soviet advantages in rocket technology, innovated furiously and ultimately landed men on the moon through sheer determination and engineering brilliance. Countless businesses have faced disruption and either adapted, Netflix pivoting from DVDs to streaming, or perished, Blockbuster refusing to change. The lesson of Mylae echoes through the ages. Innovation born of necessity, adaptation in the face of adversity, and the courage to completely reimagine the battlefield. But there's a darker side to this legacy worth considering. Rome's success at naval warfare, beginning at Mylae, enabled centuries of imperial expansion. The Pax Romana that Roman historians celebrated was built on conquest, slavery, and the destruction of rival civilizations. Carthage itself would eventually be razed to the ground, its people sold into slavery, its very existence erased. The same innovative spirit that created the Corvus would create siege engines that destroyed cities. The same adaptability that mastered naval warfare would perfect techniques of subjugation and control. Was this inevitable? Does the ability to overcome challenges necessarily lead to imperialism? These are uncomfortable questions, but Mylae forces us to ask them. Because innovation and adaptation are morally neutral tools. They can be used to defend, to explore, to build, or to conquer, to dominate, to destroy. Rome did all of it. Here's what's genuinely fascinating from a historical perspective. The Corvus, that brilliant innovation, represents a moment of pure creative problem-solving. No warfare manual described it. No previous civilization had tried it. Some Roman engineer or officer simply looked at the problem from a completely different angle and saw a solution nobody else had conceived. This is human ingenuity at its finest. The same creative spark that builds cathedrals and writes symphonies, just applied to the art of war. And yet that same innovation enabled Rome to become an imperial power that would dominate the Mediterranean for 6 centuries. Every conquered people, every enslaved population, every destroyed rival, all of it flows in some small way from that moment at Mylae when the Corvus first dropped onto a Carthaginian deck. Cause and effect in history are rarely simple. The modern parallels are unavoidable. Every major technological advancement, from the printing press to the internet, has been used for both liberation and oppression. Nuclear energy powers cities and destroys them. Artificial intelligence could solve humanity's greatest challenges or accelerate inequality and surveillance. Innovation is powerful, adaptation is necessary. But wisdom in their application, that's the eternal challenge. What would the world look like if Carthage had won at Mylae? It's tempting to imagine alternate histories, but ultimately unprovable speculation. We can say with certainty that the Mediterranean world would look different. Rome might have remained a regional Italian power. Carthaginian culture and language might have spread instead of Latin. But here's the thing. Some other power at some other time would have risen. Because the fundamental drivers of history, competition for resources, clash of cultures, technological innovation, human ambition, don't depend on specific outcomes at specific battles. Mylae mattered because Rome won. But the patterns Mylae exemplified, innovation, adaptation, determination, those would have manifested somewhere, somehow. The Battle of Mylae, stripped of its historical specifics, is a story about human potential, about what can be achieved when a society commits totally to overcoming a challenge, about the power of creative thinking to transform weakness into strength. It's a story about the Romans, yes, but it's really a story about us, about what we're capable of when we refuse to accept limitations, about the dangerous allure of that capability and the wisdom required to direct it properly. 22 centuries after Gaius Duilius returned to Rome in triumph, with bronze rams decorating his victory column, we're still learning these lessons, still grappling with the same fundamental questions. How do we innovate responsibly? How do we adapt without losing our values? How do we overcome challenges without becoming the oppressor? Rome at Mylae didn't have answers to these deeper questions. They just had a brilliant solution to a tactical problem. But that solution changed everything. For them, for Carthage, for the entire ancient world. And the echoes of that change still ripple through history, right down to our present moment. So I have to ask you, do you think Rome's incredible resilience, that refusal to quit even after catastrophic defeats, was born of iron discipline, or pure determined stubbornness that bordered on madness? There's a fine line between courage and foolhardiness, right? And here's something that genuinely fascinates me. The Corvus revolutionized naval warfare for a brief period, then disappeared when Romans became skilled enough not to need it. How often do we see that pattern in history? A revolutionary innovation that becomes obsolete precisely because it succeeds in changing the field. Which brings me to this. If you could witness one moment from the Battle of Mylae, what would it be? The first Corvus dropping? Duilius making the decision to engage? That desperate moment when Hannibal Gisco realized his fleet was being destroyed by farmers who'd barely seen the ocean before? But the biggest question, the one that keeps historians up at night, what if Carthage had won? Not just at Mylae, but in the entire First Punic War. Would Western civilization look fundamentally different? Would we be speaking a Semitic language descended from Punic instead of Romance languages descended from Latin? History is written by the victors, they say. But sometimes victory comes down to something as simple as one brilliant innovation deployed at exactly the right moment. The Corvus, a hinged bridge with a bronze spike. That's what changed the world. Let me know what you think in the comments. I read every single one, and these discussions about ancient history, about innovation, adaptation, about the moments that redirect the entire course of human civilization. These are exactly why we dive deep into these stories. Because the past isn't just past. It's a mirror, it's a lesson, it's a warning, and an inspiration all at once. The Romans at Mylae teach us that no challenge is truly insurmountable. That innovation can come from the most unexpected places. That determination, combined with creative thinking, can reshape the world. They also teach us that power, once gained, is difficult to wield wisely. That victory in one contest often just sets up the next greater challenge. These lessons, they're as relevant now as they were in 260 BC. Maybe that's the real legacy of Mylae. Not the ships that were captured or destroyed. Not the tactical innovations that eventually became obsolete. Not even the empire that rose from that victory. The real legacy is the reminder that human beings, when faced with impossible odds, have this remarkable capacity to look at the problem sideways and find a solution nobody else had imagined. That's the story of Rome at Mylae. And honestly, it's a pretty good story to carry forward into whatever challenges we face today. Thanks for watching, or listening, or however you experience this journey through ancient history. Until next time, stay curious about the past, because it has so much to teach us about the future.